You've heard the stories, but trust me, what happened at Paisley Park that night isn't something the cameras could ever capture. I worked security there, and what I saw still haunts me to this day. No one knows what really went on behind those walls, and I never told a soul. Until now. I worked security at Paisley Park. It was 2016, the year we lost Prince. I didn't think much of it at first, just another job, another high-profile location that needed extra eyes. You see, Paisley Park wasn't just a museum back then. It was a living, breathing place that still held a piece of him. It was a mess of hallways, rooms that didn't make sense, and endless corridors where you could lose yourself if you weren't careful. People came and went, walking through halls that echoed with music, with history, with something else. It was quiet, though. Too quiet. I remember walking through the main entrance that night, checking the security feeds as usual. Everything seemed normal at first, nothing out of place, just the hum of the building settling in for the night. But there was this feeling, like the walls themselves were watching me. I brushed it off at first. Probably just the weight of the place, the energy that still lingered in the air. People had said the building was strange. Some even claimed it had a life of its own, but I wasn't one to get caught up in that nonsense. The staff that night had been friendly, but there was something unsettling about them. The doorman, for example. He had no eyes, just empty sockets where his gaze should have been. I told myself he was probably just wearing dark glasses, but the longer I stared, the more I realized something was off. His smile, there was something wrong with it too. It wasn't natural, too wide, too knowing. But again, I told myself to focus. Keep your head in the game. No time for distractions. But it's hard to ignore your gut when it's telling you something's wrong. It was only a few hours into my shift when the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual. Old buildings do that, right? But there was something about it. The way the shadows bent in the corners. The hum of the fluorescent lights started to buzz louder and louder. I checked the cameras. Nothing out of the ordinary. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just outside of the lens reach. I stood still for a second, listening to the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears, when I heard it. A whisper. A voice, soft and almost indecipherable, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. My first instinct was to think it was just the wind, something catching in the vents. But then I heard it again. And this time, it was clear. Help me. I froze. I looked around the room, expecting to see someone, anyone walking by the hall outside. But there was nothing. The place was empty. I grabbed the radio, but my fingers felt cold, stiff. I couldn't get a word out. The air was thick, almost suffocating. That's when I noticed the shadow in the corner of the room, darker than anything the lights could cast. I wasn't alone. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when the camera feeds went black, every single one of them. Like someone had wiped them out, just like that. I froze. I couldn't process it at first. The monitors were just empty. Pitch black screens staring back at me like lifeless eyes. The silence in the control room was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. No static, no flicker of light. Just nothing. I scrambled to the control panel, tapping the buttons frantically, hoping to get something, anything, back on those screens. But nothing worked. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, one where I was helpless, unable to make a single move to fix what had just happened. Every second that passed made the silence feel heavier. The hum of the equipment, which usually comforted me, was now a hollow sound, a reminder that things weren't right. I glanced around the room, hoping to see someone else, anyone who might know what was going on. But I was alone. The place had been empty when I'd walked in earlier. The usual buzz of people missing, replaced by the eerie quiet. I'd thought nothing of it, figuring everyone had just gone home early. But now, with the cameras down, that feeling of isolation hit me harder than I expected. The emptiness of the room seemed to swallow me whole. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? Could it be a power failure? Maybe it was a glitch, something technical. But the longer I stared at those blank screens, the more I realized it wasn't something simple. There was something off, something more than just a system malfunction. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I've walked into plenty of buildings before, places that were meant to be welcoming, busy even, but nothing felt like Paisley Park. The first time I entered, I had no idea just how different it would be. No idea that what seemed like just another work night would turn into something I could never forget. The heavy metal door creaked as it closed behind me, shutting off the night. The cool air inside immediately hit me, familiar but strange, like I had just stepped into someone's memory. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting long shadows across the empty hallway. Everything felt off, but at the same time, it didn't. It was the kind of place that made you feel both at ease and on edge, like a cozy chair that was a little too old, just a bit too worn. I wasn't nervous. Not at first. I'd been a security guard for a while, and Paisley Park was just another assignment, right? Sure, the history behind the place was something everyone talked about: Prince, his legacy, the music that came from these walls, but that didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't there for the fame. I was there to do my job, and that's what I focused on as I made my way down the quiet hall. The hallway seemed endless, stretching on in both directions. The walls were a dull beige, the kind of color you'd forget in an instant. There were photos of Prince, huge, framed, nearly haunting as I passed them. Each one seemed to stare back at me, eyes following my every step, their expressions frozen in time. It was hard not to feel like they were watching me, but I told myself it was nothing. Just pictures, right? A museum, nothing more. I passed the security station just inside the door, where I checked in with a staff member. She gave me a polite smile, a little too polite, and handed me the security log, pointing to the monitor on the wall. "Just make sure to do your rounds. You know the drill," she said, voice high and professional. "Got it," I replied, trying to sound as confident as I could. She seemed almost too eager to be polite, but again, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the kind of place where everyone was overly nice, part of the image, I figured. As I walked further into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a place that wasn't meant to be entered. The air smelled faintly of something sweet but old, like incense or a perfume that had lingered for years. There was a certain heaviness to the air, too, something that pressed down on your chest like it was holding its breath. The silence around me was the worst part. It wasn't natural. It was too still. I moved forward, past what looked like a lounge area, There were couches that had seen better days, some dim lights in the corners casting a warm glow, but I could tell they hadn't been used in a while. The space was too neat, almost sterile, like it was frozen in time. I kept walking. Something about the space made me feel like I was intruding, as though I was disturbing the memory of what it used to be, rather than just being a part of the present. The deeper I went into the building, the stranger it felt. Each step echoed down the halls, bouncing off walls like there was no one else there. I wasn't alone, though. I could feel it. It wasn't just the emptiness of the space. It was the way the air shifted around me, the way the corners of the room seemed to stretch a little too far. Every time I turned, I felt like there was something just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the routine of checking security feeds, making sure every corner was covered, that everything was locked up. But as I reached the farthest hallway, the one no one really talked about, a chill swept over me, sudden and sharp. I looked down at the floor, suddenly aware that my footsteps were too loud, too intrusive. I could feel my body language change without even meaning to. My shoulders were tense, my hands stiff at my sides as I walked, like I was afraid something would suddenly jump out from behind one of those long, dark hallways. My feet moved faster, but I didn't want to seem too eager. I didn't want anyone to think I was scared. So I kept walking, straight ahead, trying to focus on the hum of the lights, the steady beat of my heart. Anything to remind me this was just a normal night. But the further I went, the harder it was to shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the photos on the walls anymore. It was every corner, every room, like the building itself was waiting for something, or someone. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Still, that unease lingered, just at the edge of my mind. I checked the security feed again, but this time something caught my eye. One of the cameras had moved. It wasn't much, just a slight tilt, almost imperceptible. It made me freeze. A slight cold sweat began to creep down my spine. The building was supposed to be empty, just me and a few staff members here and there. But the more I looked around, the more I realized the walls themselves were hiding something. I walked a little faster, heart racing now. The sound of my own footsteps grew louder in my ears, drowning out everything else. I needed to finish my rounds and leave the hallways behind. But what I encountered next shattered everything I thought I knew about that place. As I continued through the building, the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach only grew. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the silence or the shadows lurking in the corners of every room. It was more than that. It was a presence, something in the air that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. Like the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept walking, trying to focus on my job, trying to ignore the sinking feeling that seemed to grow stronger with each step. The further I went, the more I noticed things that didn't sit right. I passed a few staff members on my rounds. One of the housekeepers gave me a look, something strange in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was more like recognition, but not in a good way. Her eyes lingered on me for a second longer than normal, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of look that made you feel like you just stepped into something you weren't supposed to see. I gave her a quick nod, trying to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something I didn't. I moved on, deeper into the building, trying to focus on the security feeds. But something kept drawing my attention to the strange behavior of the people I passed. As I walked past a small hallway, I noticed a guest standing by the door, looking at me. He wasn't supposed to be there. There was a no-guest rule for the security areas. I've worked in enough places to know when someone's in the wrong spot, and this guy definitely didn't belong. But what made it worse was the way he looked at me. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, and there was something unsettling about the way he stared, like he was waiting for me to make a move. I froze for a moment, trying to gauge whether I should approach him or keep moving. The air between us felt thick, like the space had suddenly become too small. His gaze never faltered. It was intense, calculating. I could feel my stomach tighten, but I told myself to stay calm. It was just a guest, nothing more. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice coming out a little sharper than I intended. The man didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head, like he was studying me. It lasted a little too long for comfort. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost hypnotic. "I'm just admiring the place," he said, his tone too smooth, too practiced. "It's beautiful, don't you think?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's definitely something." But as I turned to walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, his eyes boring into my back. My steps quickened, and I tried to brush off the encounter. It was nothing, just another strange guest. I had to keep moving. There was no time to get caught up in oddities. But then, as I reached the end of the hallway, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A door, one that was usually locked, stood slightly ajar. The access room where only certain staff were allowed. I knew for a fact that it wasn't supposed to be open. This door had a special code lock, and no one was supposed to be in there without permission. The area behind it was off limits, and the staff knew that. Yet here it was, open, an invitation to whatever was hidden inside. I hesitated, staring at the door for a few seconds longer than I should have. Something told me not to go in, but I couldn't help myself. The curiosity, the pull, it was too strong. I stepped toward it, my feet dragging as if I was walking in someone else's shoes. My hand hovered over the door handle, unsure whether I should turn it or walk away. I took a deep breath and reached for the door. As I touched the handle, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, like someone or something was right behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. The hallway was still, empty, but the sense of dread, it lingered, thick and heavy. I pulled my hand away from the door, stepping back. I wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about the feeling that the place wasn't as safe as it seemed. I moved on quickly, heart pounding, trying to dismiss what I'd just seen. But as I continued my rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every corner I turned, every step I took, I felt it. The eyes, the watching. It wasn't just my imagination. Something or someone was in here with me, and then I saw it. It was the staff, the ones who usually greeted me with a friendly smile, but tonight, there was something off about them. The way they moved, their eyes too vacant, too distant. They didn't look at me the same way anymore. There was no recognition, no warmth, just coldness. almost like they were following a script, but they weren't really there. I passed one of the security monitors in a small room, and one of the staff members, a woman in her late 30s, was standing there. But when she turned to look at me, I could see it in her eyes. It wasn't her. It was like someone else was looking out from behind those eyes. I'd seen that look before, in movies, in books. It was the look of someone who wasn't themselves anymore. Someone who was controlled. It was unsettling. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stared at me, and for a moment, I didn't think she was going to answer. Then finally she spoke. "I'm fine. Just watching the feeds." I nodded quickly and turned to leave, but her voice stopped me again. "Don't go in the back rooms tonight," she said softly. Too softly. Her words hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. I didn't know if it was a warning or if it was some kind of test. I wasn't sure anymore. But that was just the beginning. It wasn't the door that had been left open or the strange behavior of the staff that made me realize something was off. No, it wasn't even the chilling feeling that lingered in the air like smoke. It was when I checked the cameras again. You see, I'd been doing my rounds, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I'd seen those strange looks, the odd behavior, the whispers in the hallways, but I thought maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was the late hours getting to me. Maybe it was just the weight of this place, its history, its strange energy. People had talked about Paisley Park being haunted, about the spirit of Prince lingering in the halls. But I never bought into that stuff. Not really. I was just doing my job. But when I sat down in the security room that night and checked the live feed, something clicked. Something inside me told me I needed to pay closer attention. I'd already glanced over the cameras once, just a routine check. Everything seemed normal. But as I moved my cursor across the screens, something caught my eye on the far right camera, one that covered a hallway near the back of the building. The area was always quiet, and usually the camera would just show an empty corridor. But tonight was different. I froze, my finger hovering over the mouse as I stared at the screen. The hallway was empty, like always, but there was something moving, a shadow. It wasn't big. In fact, it was small, barely noticeable at first, but when I leaned closer, I saw it more clearly. A figure, dark and indistinct, moving down the hall. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It wasn't even human. It was too fluid, too fast, like it didn't belong in this world. I clicked the zoom button, but by the time the camera focused, the shadow was gone. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog from my head. I must have imagined it. Maybe the camera was glitching. I checked the feed again. Still nothing. Just an empty hallway. But something inside me felt wrong. Deeply wrong. My heart started to race, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, cold and fast. It was one of those moments when you knew you should ignore it, but every instinct inside of you screamed to pay attention. I checked the other feeds. There were no signs of movement in the building. No one was walking around. No one was in the halls. Just silence. But that one screen, the one with the hallway, kept pulling my attention. My fingers hovered over the mouse, the decision to click the zoom button again nearly paralyzing me. Something told me I had to do it. I clicked it, and this time, the hallway was completely still. There was nothing there, not even a flicker of movement. I let out a breath, half relieved, half disappointed. But as I was about to move on to the next screen, I saw it again. The shadow. It was larger this time, almost as if it had materialized out of nowhere, stretching down the length of the hall. But when I tried to zoom in again, the camera went black, completely black. I cursed under my breath, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? I checked the rest of the cameras, but none of them were showing anything unusual. I looked at the back room camera. Clear. The front entrance. Clear. Everything seemed fine. But that damn hallway, something was there. And the camera feed was cutting out every time I tried to focus on it. I leaned forward in my chair, staring at the now blank screen. Get it together, I muttered to myself. But my voice sounded far too small, too weak in the eerie silence of the room. The quiet was suffocating. And that damn shadow, it had to be a glitch. Maybe a reflection. Maybe the light playing tricks. But deep down, I knew something was off. I checked the time. It was almost 3 a.m. I stood up from the chair, my legs feeling weak, like the air in the room had suddenly turned to lead. I paced back and forth in the small security room, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The building was still. No noise. No sound. Then, without warning, the lights in the hallway flickered. At first, it was nothing more than a slight flicker, barely noticeable. But then the lights went out completely, plunging the hall into darkness. I stood frozen, staring at the screen in front of me, my pulse hammering in my chest. The lights didn't come back on. I reached for the radio at my side, pressing the button to call for help, but all I got was static. I slammed the radio down on the table, the sound of it vibrating through my skull. The building was silent. Too silent. That's when I heard it. A soft click. At first, it was so faint, I thought it was my imagination, but then it came again. A click. Closer this time. And then another. Each one getting louder, closer. I slowly turned my head toward the door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I moved slowly toward the door, my body refusing to obey my mind's commands. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle, but before I could turn it, the clicks grew louder. And then the lights came back on. But it wasn't the same. The lights were dimmer, almost sickly. The shadows on the walls seemed deeper, darker. The air felt heavier, suffocating. I turned the handle, my heart thumping in my chest, and as I opened the door, I stepped into the hallway. It was empty. Nothing was there, except for the faint smell of something burning. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but my lungs refused to fill with air. Something was here. I could feel it now, creeping just out of sight. The building had come alive, and it wasn't with good intentions. Then came the real shock. I looked down at the floor, at the cracks in the tiles, and there it was. A trail, dark and wet, like something had been dragged through the hall. A trail of something I couldn't and didn't want to identify. I followed it, each step feeling like it was pushing me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. But when I reached the end of the hall, the door to the back room was wide open. The one that was supposed to be locked. And standing in the doorway, barely visible in the dim light, was the figure from the camera. And this time, I knew it wasn't a glitch. I don't remember exactly when the dread turned into something more, something real. It happened slowly, like the tightening of a noose around my neck, the kind of pressure you don't notice until you can't breathe anymore. I had already crossed the threshold into the unknown by the time I saw the figure in the doorway. But what came next shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the figure. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just the dim light, the shadows twisting in the corners of my mind. But no, it was real. It was too real. I could see it now, clearly. A man. But not a man. Not in any way that made sense. His eyes were black. Not just dark, not just deep, but completely black. Like there was nothing inside. And his face was wrong. The skin hung loosely around his bones, like something that had been abandoned, forgotten. His mouth was slightly open and his lips were cracked as though he hadn't spoken in years, and yet there was a kind of sickening calm about him, a stillness that made every nerve in my body scream to run, but my feet refused to move. I thought I was going to pass out. My vision blurred, and for a second, I thought I was dreaming. There was no way this was happening. Not here. Not in Paisley Park, the place everyone said was filled with nothing but music and memories. But then, the figure spoke. The voice came from him, but it wasn't his voice. It was hollow, like the sound of a broken radio, static and distortion bleeding through. I couldn't make out the words at first, but I felt them, felt the weight of them pressing into my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. "You shouldn't have seen this," he said. The words cut through the air, sharp and dry. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of what was happening. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But there he was, standing in front of me, his eyes still locked onto mine, like he was waiting for me to say something. Anything. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the figure stepped back into the room, his movement smooth, almost too fluid. My body moved on its own, following him, stepping through the doorway without thinking, driven by a strange compulsion that I couldn't understand. Inside, the room was dark, cold. The air felt different, thick with something I couldn't place. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, thumping louder and louder as I took slow, cautious steps inside. And that's when I saw it. On the floor, right in the center of the room, was a symbol, painted in what I could only assume was blood. It was jagged, twisted, like something out of a nightmare. I felt a sharp, icy chill run down my spine, and my vision blurred again, as if my mind couldn't handle what it was seeing. I stepped closer, unable to look away, and I realized that the blood wasn't just on the floor, it was everywhere. It was smeared on the walls, dripping down in thick red lines, as though someone had been desperately trying to escape. I felt my stomach lurch. I was choking on the air, but my legs refused to stop moving. I had to get out. I had to get out now. But then, from the corner of the room, a sound, a scraping, like nails on glass. My eyes snapped toward the source of the noise, and my blood ran cold. There, in the corner, was another figure, its face obscured by shadows, but its body twisted unnaturally, as though it had been bent in ways it shouldn't have been. The figure's head tilted sharply to one side, its neck cracking with each movement, and it let out a low, guttural sound like it was struggling to breathe. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate, its movements jerky, mechanical. I backed up, stumbling over the symbol, my heart racing faster than I thought possible. The room seemed to pulse around me, closing in tighter, pressing in on me from all sides. The figure in the corner reached out with a long, skeletal hand, fingers clawing at the air, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was like I was suffocating in the presence of something that wasn't human. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go. I screamed, but the sound was choked off before it could escape my throat. The room felt like it was shrinking, and the figure in the corner was moving closer, its hollow eyes never leaving me. The darkness around me seemed to deepen, consuming everything until all I could see was that thing coming for me, its cold hand outstretched, reaching for me. And then I heard it. The voice again. Not the figure's voice, a different voice, familiar and yet wrong. "Leave this place," it whispered, and the voice carried with it a sense of finality, of something ancient and powerful. It sent a shock through my body, my limbs freezing, my heart stopping for a split second. And I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't just being haunted. I wasn't just seeing things. Something was reaching out from the depths of Paisley Park, something far darker than any of us realized. I turned back to the door, desperate to escape, and I felt it. Something cold and sharp brushing against my skin, like the touch of 1,000 needles. I didn't look back as I fled. I couldn't. My body moved without thought. The only thing that mattered was getting out of that room, out of that place. But even as I ran, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. And that's when everything changed. I ran. And I didn't think about it. I didn't stop to process what I'd just seen. I didn't even stop to question why I was running. My legs moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me down the hallway, away from that room, away from whatever that thing was. I was too terrified to look behind me, but I could feel it. I knew it was following me, or maybe just waiting for me to turn around. The thought of looking back made my stomach turn, but every step I took felt like it was getting heavier, like something was pulling me back into the darkness. I didn't know how I made it to the exit. The halls, which had once felt familiar, now felt like a maze. Each turn, each doorway was a reminder that I was stuck, trapped in a place that had gone far beyond anything I could understand. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows, and the eerie hum of the building's ancient machinery seemed to grow louder with each passing second. My breath was ragged, desperate, but the fear, the raw terror, made my legs move faster. I finally reached the main exit. The door was locked, of course. I didn't know why I thought it would open easily. I fumbled for my key card, my hands trembling, too cold, too numb to find the right one. The air around me grew thick again, heavier. It felt like the room itself was closing in. I could hear something in the hallway behind me. Footsteps, the same slow, calculated clicks I had heard earlier. Only now, they were getting closer. I forced the card into the lock, and the door clicked open. The light from outside, the light from the street, was so bright it nearly blinded me. I didn't think. I just ran. I burst through the door, stumbling into the parking lot, and then I didn't stop. I couldn't. My mind was a mess of panic and confusion, and I didn't know what was real anymore. I finally stopped when I reached the car. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the hood, gasping for air. I leaned against the windshield, my hands pressed against my face. I wanted to scream, but the only sound that came out was a strangled, broken cry. I was shaking. I was cold, too cold, even though it wasn't freezing outside. I didn't know how long I stayed there, minutes, hours. I didn't care. All I could hear were the echoes of my own breath, the pounding of my heart, and the fading sound of those footsteps. I pulled myself together enough to get into the car. I didn't even remember putting the key in the ignition, but the engine started and I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in that place. As I drove, my mind kept replaying what I had just seen. The figure in the doorway, the blood on the floor, the symbol, and that voice telling me to leave. But I wasn't sure what was worse, what I'd seen, or the realization that I had felt it, that I wasn't just losing my mind. I was feeling something real, something that I couldn't explain away. I reached my apartment in a haze, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe, but even then, the walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. I couldn't escape the feeling. Every corner seemed to hold shadows. Every creak in the floorboards felt like footsteps. Every flicker of the lights felt like a warning. I thought I would be okay once I was home. I thought I would be safe. But even as I sat on my couch, every inch of me was on edge. I couldn't stop thinking about that place, Paisley Park. I couldn't stop thinking about the things I'd seen. What had I seen? I couldn't answer that question, and that terrified me more than anything else. Because if I couldn't explain it, then I couldn't protect myself from it. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing things, voices, whispers, the faint sound of someone tapping on my window. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be. But as the hours passed, I realized I couldn't outrun it. Whatever it was, it had followed me. The next day, I went to work like nothing had happened. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't trust myself enough to say anything, let alone share what I had seen. I couldn't even look people in the eye. How could I? How could I explain what had happened without sounding completely insane? But as the days went by, the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it only grew worse. I felt it with me everywhere I went, lurking just outside my vision, waiting to make itself known. The shadow I had seen, it wasn't just something from the building. It was something bigger. Something that wanted me to know it was there. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't think without feeling it, watching it like it was right behind me. I started having nightmares. Nightmares that weren't even dreams. They felt like memories, flashes of moments I had lived through, but had somehow erased from my mind. The figure, the door, the blood, the smell of decay in the air. I woke up each night with my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, convinced that it had found me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine, so I drove back to Paisley Park. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought going back would somehow make it go away. Maybe I thought I could face it, that I could make sense of it. But when I got there, the building was silent. It was locked up tight, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew it wasn't over. I walked around the back of the building, my feet dragging, my mind spinning. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. And then I saw it. The door. The same door. It was open. The last time I saw that door, it had been locked. The last time I was here, I had tried to escape, tried to leave, but now it was open. And I felt it. The air thickening around me, the heaviness returning. I didn't know what to do. My legs were shaking, my whole body frozen in place. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, thumping louder than ever. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I thought leaving that place would end it. I thought driving away would be enough to escape whatever haunted those halls. But it's still with me. Every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow. Feel that presence. Hear the whispers that never left. The smell of decay. It's like it's in my skin now. I can't wash it off. I know now that it's not something I can outrun. Sometimes I still hear the clicking of footsteps, echoing in the quiet of my apartment. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, frozen, knowing something is standing in the dark corner of my room, waiting. I don't know what it wants, but I know it hasn't let me go. I keep thinking if I ignore it long enough, it will disappear, but deep down, I'm afraid I'm wrong. If you're ever near Paisley Park, don't go inside. Don't open that door, no matter how innocent it looks, because once you've seen it, once it's noticed you, it won't stop until it gets what it's been waiting for. And trust me, it's still waiting.